My name is Michael Nielsen. Since you're watching this, you might know me from my YouTube channel, Big Hairy Guitars. Over there, I do tons of nerdy guitar experiments, A-Bing this and that. I love 80s and 90s era gear, rack stuff, effects, preamps. I got here, here in particular at my studio, I do movie trailers, film scores, video game scores, things like that. You might have played a game called Forza Motorsport on the Xbox or Splinter Cell. That was me and my partner. And before that, I was doing a lot of pop music production. I did Selena Gomez's first single, and I've done Philip Sayce and Barry Manilow, and like a lot of fun stuff like that. But when I have time, and my passion is guitar, that's what I spend my time and all of my money on. In terms of guitar influences, it's really all over the map. But I really instantly was taken by sort of all of the Steves, like Steve Vai, Steve Lukather, Steve Stevens, Steve Morse. That was really... Those guys, it's really weird that they're all kind of named Steve, but they kind of hit me at one time. And of course, Crossroads was sort of the thing that launched me into like, oh, I must do this. There's no way out.
I love that.
Van Halen was everywhere anyway, but I sort of took it for granted. And then all of a sudden I borrowed 5150 and OU812. My rock metal guy sort of became like Zach. That album, that Ozzy album, the two, really, the No Rest for the Wicked and No More Tears hit me like a ton of bricks. It was like, that's the coolest thing I've ever heard.
I need EMGs.
Yes, yeah, right? Yeah, this is as close as I've gotten on my EMGs. And then Steve Lukather, I'm a Steve Lukather maniac.
More EMGs.
Right, people give them a hard time, but like the number of amazing records and tone tent poles that have been done on EMGs is staggering. When I hear my playing, I go, oh, that was a Zach thing, that was a Lukather thing, a little Steve Vai. Obviously, there's impossible to get away from a Van Halen thing when you.
Sure.
Yeah, I was like had my eye on the rack stuff super early on. Like, it went Fender Sidekick 15, which was this big.
Oh, I know that amp.
With a Marshall Governor pedal, which sounded strangely just like Randy Rhoads.
Which Randy Rhoads? Blizzard of Oz?
Blizzard of Oz, yeah, not the live stuff. It was a very buzzsaw, kind of bright. So from there I went to a PV Bandit 112. Did you ever have one of those?
I never had one of those. But they were everywhere.
With a quadriverb.
Oh yeah, the Oasis.
Yeah. And I just spent hours like, delay up one notch, delay down. Okay, there, it's perfect. And then I went and I took it to a gig and I'm like, I can't hear any of my effects. They're all gone.
Exactly, because once the drummer hits the snare, everything's...
bone dry.
Yeah.
Bone dry. Yeah, so I went from there. And then I went to I thought it was going to take off. My guitar teacher, who I had for a couple weeks, he invested in this company called Radco. They made a preamp. They were an LA company, and like 3-channel preamp, and he's like, it's better than the Soldano.
Oh.
I'm like, I'll buy it from you.
Oh.
And then I instantly regretted it.
That's why he was your guitar teacher for 3 weeks.
Yeah, like this
guy.
This stinks. Yeah, and then I got into a Rivera TBR1, like this giant behemoth, which is all rack related. It's a preamp power amp into it and stuff. So until I was in a dual rectifier because it was, by that time, we hit the late 90s and it was just dual rectifier. That's all there was. Well, I had a band for a while, and we had success licensing music, but we had no success in like selling music, which was sort of like a precursor to what I do now. So it's like I write music and license it to movie trailers and stuff.
Yeah.
So during that time, I had a Marshall 2010, is that what it is? JCM 800, but the 2-channel one.
Oh, yeah.
That sounded really bad. I think I had a stinker.
Okay.
And then I got a Top Hat Ambassador. which was it was a 6v6 amp, like 40 watts or something. The loudest 40 watts. Yeah.
Okay.
It was a 212 glass cutting, kick your face in, so painful. So painful with a Telecaster. So yeah, it was just like, gah! Because at the time you couldn't, you had to just buy stuff. You couldn't. How do you hear anything?
Right.
But I did. So as my music production stuff started taking off, and I stopped doing the band stuff, it was like, all right. And I sort of stopped playing guitar outside of little bits at a time until I was at Guitar Center and tried a VHT Deliverance 120.
Oh.
And I was like, this is it! Yeah. And that got me back into tone.
That's amazing.
Yeah. I started getting more nitpicky. It was really based on just trying to get a sound, because this was before there were any good attenuators. Mm-hmm. There were attenuators, like the THD existed, sure, and you could shave some volume off it, mm-hmm, but if you went low, it sounded like
really funky.
Yeah, fuzzy and stuff.
It had the clicky.
Yeah. So you just got 4 settings or 5 settings or something like that. Yeah. There was no such thing as IRs, really. Mm-hmm. It was like the ultimate attenuator.
I had one of those.
Yeah,
clicky again.
Yeah, you just burned through so much money trying to achieve something that really was impossible at the time. Yep. I had the Rivera silent cabinet, which was a speaker in a box.
I had one of those.
We're living parallel lives trying to achieve a sound. It was so hard.
Okay, maybe this will be the one. Maybe this will be it.
Yeah, I had the Randall speaker in a box. And those didn't even sound that good because you can't put a speaker, you needed some air. Yeah. So when you turn up the volume, it's funny how the frequency starts to go, and everything turned into this weird Megadeth mid-range that was just like...
I just remember going, it's just too much speaker. Like, just the recipe is off.
Yeah, guitar. No matter where you put the mic.
No.
It was always the same fizzy.
Exactly, yeah, so that didn't work.
Yeah, and that's super weird. So I had custom ordered a Rode case about half the size of this room and put a 412 in it, closed it, put it in the garage, had wire run from my garage up to the second story where my studio room was at. Okay. And did that. That still sounded terrible. Oh. Because it's a speaker in a box. Yeah. And it also would shake the house because now I had this bass frequencies in a garage that was just like, woof, woof, woof. If I ended up unwiring a 412 and just having one speaker behind me, which was the best sounding thing, but you have this loud speaker right in back of you. So it was just a constant journey of trying to get a guitar sound that sounded like something on a record. Right. And it was just like unnervingly painful to try and get that sound. Mm-hmm. Well, they were like in the ether, mm-hmm, and super secret. Mm-hmm. And even now, to make them is really challenging because there's no single app that you just open the app, make an IR, and you have to sort of, if you have a box that makes an IR and extract it and stuff. It was a constant. I've watched every YouTube video. None of them really quite do it. Or if they explain it, it didn't make sense to me, or you had to have a PC to do it, which I didn't have access to. And that. So I started making IRs based on some of the other hardware that you could make the IR specifically for that box, like a 2-notes box or something like that. So I have a friend that ended up, I don't even know how he did it. He was like, type in this, type in this, type in this, and created a program that will extract them. I could create them and extract them. But really, the creation of the IR is still a mystery to me. I just know how to do it. It's like, nobody move. I can never get rid of this computer because this is the only computer I have set up to. And I went through millions of IRs. Well, it feels like millions because I'd buy these packs and they had like 800 IRs. And then I would record something and then I'd get to the end and be like, this is a disaster. Like, this IR doesn't sound like anything that a mic speaker would represent. Right. So as I'm making all of my decisions based on this tonal spectrum, I painted myself in a corner, and now my mix is horrible. And it's hard to go back because my amp, I had the treble at like 10 and the bass at 10, to compensate. And yeah, so it was so frustrating. That's really why I dove in hard on trying to figure it out and then making my own stuff. It was all for myself.
So it was out of necessity.
100%. Yeah, well, I met Steve because I had a Deliverance, and at that point, I had lucked into getting a VHT 2150.
Oh, sweet.
And I was always a fan of Steve, and he was an LA guy and integral in these tones. That a lot of the credit always goes to the preamp guy, and that's where the glory is.
Sure.
But you go through every rack and you just look down 9 inches, and it all is this huge Steve Fryette power amp.
It was always there. Yeah.
Yeah, and when you play through a Steve Fryette power amp, it's not the same as a Mesa Boogie and a Marshall power amp, or plugging into the back of a effects loop in a Marshall or something. They're distinctly different. So I had grabbed onto that, like, this guy knows what he's doing, and he is as important to these tones as Mike Soldano with his X88R is, or John Suhr with the custom audio preamps, these of that era. I think I may have reached out to Steve to swap the faceplate from VHT to Fryette for my Deliverance.
Yeah.
Just, it's one of those nerdy things where you're like, I'll spend, $20 to get a new faceplate or something. And we hit it off because he's a wealth of knowledge, and he's happy to answer questions and convey the knowledge and stuff. Yeah, so he had reached out to see if I wanted to do some IRs for them, and I said, no, I don't know how to do it. Not interested at all. And he's like, cool, no worries. And then like a year later, I had sort of, in a sense, cracked the code, although I told you, like, there's still some mystery behind the technical of it, but I had cracked the code of successfully capturing my cab with different products and stuff, and now I could make IRs. So I was like, yeah, let's do that, because we talked about this earlier. The Fryette cabs have a sound.
Right.
His speaker choices have a sound.
Right.
And it's not Marshall, Mesa. It's none of the usual suspects. It's a strong characteristic, and it's super awesome. And I wanted to have that for myself without having to buy 15 cabs.
Right.
Yeah, I felt like at that point I was like, I got a good handle on how to properly capture the cabs, because I'd done a lot, spent a lot of time, done it at big studios, done it here, and I've seen the translation, because that's one of the things. You could just do it and hope for the best, but it's the sort of 10,000 hours kind of thing. And hadn't quite hit that, but I felt pretty good about it. Especially, I know Steve's going to know if it's good or bad, so I didn't want to do it if I had to put it out there and he goes, "You're an idiot." This is like the worst thing that could happen.
Okay, now I know not to ask you to do anything anymore.
We dove in, and he sent a big truck full of cabs. I'll send you the pictures. It filled the room, and it was a little Christmassy and a little horrifying at the same time. But yeah, it was like the best cabs, filled with a variety of speakers, and his own. He brought his own Hiwatt cab, and
the vintage Hiwatt. I think some Sound City stuff.
Yeah.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With there was Fanes and Eminences and all kinds of stuff. So then I just got to capturing, and I went capture crazy, because with all of the capture processes, whether it's like a Kemper or IRs, there's a lot of stuff you got to throw out. Okay, that's cool, and because it's such minute changes that when you're sitting here, you could be like, I think that's it. But then after a couple hours, like, you clear your head and you come back, you're like, oh, sorry, I was starting to lean really heavy on the treble because I was burning out or something like that.
So what would you say kind of the success to flop ratio is for, like, how many snapshots do you take?
I feel kind of like you get one good one out of 10.
Okay.
So the challenge is getting something more broad that I could give to you, and you could go like, this
I can use
works.
this.
Yeah, works for me too. And anyone else could try, not just for my particular amp or my particular taste, you know.
Yeah.
When I'm setting up the mics for the captures, I'll usually set up 1 to 4 mics. 2 SM50, well, it's a SM57 and then a pre-57, a vintage, it's called a Unidyne.
Oh, I know that one.
Yeah, and it actually sounds different than the 57. It's a little beefier, a little warmer, and a little more thick. So it's a nice complement. Even if you're going to mic 2 of the same speakers, you get just this nice sort of shift that sort of covers the right. You know, you've seen a frequency chart where it's like this. Mm-hmm. You start to get 2 mics, and then it starts to level out. Right. It doesn't create a bigger thing, and I feel like even if you go 2 SM57s, you get a more even sound across the board. And then I love ribbon mics, so I have the Royer 121 in there, and then sometimes I'll throw in just something oddball, either like another ribbon mic, like a Coles, or you know, like a Sennheiser, something else. But I always lean on the 57s. They just are the sound, and everything else supports that. And then I go into over here, which you can't see. I have a little single rack mixer, so I go into the API preamps, and I can get everything sounding good and balanced, and like, I don't mind adding a little API EQ because it's not like when you're at the end of a mix and you're like, I'm gonna just crank this and fine tune. This is broad stroke stuff, like a little warmer, a little darker, to create the sound that you just, on the best day when magic happens, you're trying to recreate those days on a day that maybe it doesn't. So you get everything sounding great, and then you capture that. So even without moving mics, you could adjust balances of the microphones by 5%, and it's totally different. Mm-hmm. And then you adjust that, and then if you go down to 1 mic, then you're really going up and down. And I have the little robot, the mic robot.
No kidding.
Yeah, I'll show you that in there. So yeah, there's a million ways to capture it, and that's part of the, just capture a ton of them and then weed out the trash on there. I'll go through a ton of different guitars and a ton of different amps, and like start to just earmark and be like, all right, these sounded great for this, these sounded great for this. And if you start seeing one that keeps showing up again and again and again, that's how you start to narrow them down really nicely. And then we wanted to pinpoint like something nice for each of the speakers that really captured the sound of the speakers too. Right. And a lot of them I was unfamiliar with because it was the entire lineup of speakers. So that wasn't until I sent it to you and Steve that like, I hope they sound good, but I hope they sound like the speakers.
Right. Like, especially to somebody who's been living with these.
Yeah, you know, if you know it intimately and it sounds familiar, that's what we're going for.
Steve saying his favorite part of getting these things back was, that's my amp. That's my cabinet. Yeah. That's how it sounds, you know?
Yeah, that was a good feeling. Like, oh, okay, we're onto something there.
All right.
The other part of being involved was slightly selfish because I had started a recording room at home, and I needed a process to record guitars there too. So I have my power station here. So I was able to take the PLIR home and get the same sounds that I'm used to here.
And you were an early power load adopter. You used the version 1.
Yeah, I love that instantly. Yeah,
and you've been using that for years now.
Yeah, I mean that's like to me that's an iconic box now. There's it's like a Plexi or a Lexicon and like the power load, the Xerox machine. Yeah, it's like the power load it's so useful in a million different ways.
Right, I feel the same way.
It's a must-have.
So then when the PLIR came out, you were really excited because not only could you use it in the ways that you had been previously, but now it was going to suit your purposes at home now.
Yeah, totally.
In a studio environment at home.
Yeah, that's it. I could have something. I didn't need the power amp because I didn't need to get louder. That was the whole point. I just need that little slice that I can have these dope cabs in, and it could handle, I know it's well built, and it could handle megawatt amps, and it's, you know, you just set it and you're off to the races. I was super excited about the PLIR to begin with, and then being able to come and get involved with it was very exciting, and to help voice the cabs that it comes with was super awesome. Had a blast being involved with it, and I think it turned out really great.